Here I've got a small jar with some naphtha in it, and I'm just dropping the retard gear train and delay action into that jar, which just covers them with naphtha. I'll leave them in there to soak for a minute, and then I'll work the mechanism to flush out any oil or grease that's in the mechanism. Now here, what were we up to? Oh yes, main drive cam. I'll zoom you in. There's our main drive cam there, and the spring. I'm looking at the state of the spring, and that's in good condition. These springs lose tension over time, and that one's in quite reasonable condition. So these two components, I just need to clean them with a bit of naphtha. I'll lubricate the cam with a bit of molybdenum, and all I'm cleaning away here really is any trace of old lubricant. Not because I need to be rid of the lubricant exactly, but lubricants, particularly greases, tend to attract and hold any dust, and any dust and abrasive particles of that nature, we don't really want them in there. So that's all that's required there. They do not need to sparkle and shine. So a little bit of molybdenum. Now this big curved edge, you want, make sure you get that lubricated. And these points here and here, that's where it picks up the blade actuating ring. Now this should be able to fit into place now. It drops in here. That's good. On the Retina Reflex you can't achieve that because you have to take this post off so you can get the thing in place. And here I just want a smear of molybdenum around the inside edge of that spring. You often see those springs absolutely smothered in graphite grease. I'm not at all convinced that it makes any practical difference to the way the shutter works. Alright, so that's clipped into place. The end of the spring hooks into a notch in that little bracket. So with this cocked, I can cock the main spring there, and if we press the shutter release, the shutter should fire. There it goes. So that's all good, that's all happy, and now it needs the retard gear train and the delay action in here. There was something I spotted a second ago I wanted to do. Well, that's right. Bit of molybdenum paste down this arm of that lever, just so that when that's cocked and when that lever comes past, that there's no hard friction there, because there's quite a bit of tension on that spring. This should push back out of the way quite smoothly, but better safe than sorry. Right, so the shutter's good to go. Needs the retard gear train, which fits here, and a delay action or self timer, which fits over here. And they have to be cleaned and prepared. And you can see them sitting down the bottom there. So let's just pull that delay action out for the moment. Now what I normally do is work the mechanism in the naphtha. I'll tell you how I do that, since otherwise it's as clear as mud. This pin here couples to the mechanism, and if you push that across against the resistance, it'll come back under its own steam. We have to do that action a good number of times in the solvent, and basically the mechanism is working in the solvent. It means that any mating surfaces will tend to be washed free of any contaminants. Likewise, the pivot points for all of those little gears, if they were sticky with old oil, that'll get flushed out too. Now, as for the correct number of times to work the mechanism, 10's a good round number. I can tell from the action of the speed train from experience how clean it is, how well it's working, and make my decision as to how much I need to clean it further. But 10's a good round number, it's a good place to start. If the speed train was heavily contaminated with thick oils or a lot of dust or even light surface corrosion, you might need to do that more times in order to get a mechanism that moved smoothly. Likewise, if it's nice and clean already, you might not need to do much at all. A quick swish through the solvent would be all that's required. I'm just wiping that top surface. That's quite marked. It's not important that it be clean and shiny. It makes no difference to the mechanism. But try and get things to look good. I'm just watching the action of that speed train and listening to the buzz of it. I'm listening to see if there's any hesitation. That appears to be running smoothly. So I can pop that to one side. And now I have to deal with the retard gear train. Now the retard gear train is cocked by pulling this arm out, and it's released by holding back this little tab here. And those actions we need to do while the mechanism is immersed in solvent in that naphtha. And it's to do exactly the same thing as we've done with the retard gear train. It's just to work the mechanism and make sure that all the surfaces are flushed with the solvent, that the surfaces that come in contact with each other, like the teeth on the gears, the solvent is there and it'll just wash off any contaminants. Working the mechanism repeatedly may also deal with any slight surface roughness there may be on those gear teeth as a result of very light surface oxidation. I'm not thinking of great lumps of rust, I'm thinking of just slight oxidation. Anything that would tend to make the teeth reluctant to slide over each other correctly. As with the retard gear train, I'm listening to the buzz to give me an indication of how smoothly that speed train is running. And to give me an indication of whether I need to keep doing this or whether basically it's clean, and that's as far as I need to go. That sounds good. So I'll fish that out of there. I'll blow all the solvent out of that, because any solvent that's in there now, you saw the state of that solvent in that jar, it's not exactly clean. So any solvent here would be have its own freight of oil or dust, and we want to blow it all out. We don't want that settling onto surfaces inside the mechanism. Again, I'm just going to wipe the surface of the plates top and bottom to remove dirty marks. That's all that really needs to be done. So these two, I want to lubricate those now lightly with a bit of graphite powder. And that's all I'm going to use. Sometimes you see people will recommend putting a tiny drop of watchmaker's oils on the pivots of all the little gears here. I haven't found that to be useful myself. All I've found is it tends to slow down the mechanism and then they don't work correctly. They might sound nice and smooth, but they're not working at the proper speed. So, what do I do here? Well, all I do is drop a little bit of graphite powder into the mechanism and then work it to work that graphite powder in. Just tap it to get rid of any excess, and much the same with the delay action. Cock that, pull back the little tab that sets it running, let it run with a bit of graphite powder in there. That'll find its way into the mating surfaces, lubricate what needs to be lubricated, tap it to get rid of the excess. Those two components just need to be blown out with the air to remove any excess powder. Otherwise, you don't want graphite powder floating around loose in your shutter, because it'll inevitably find its way onto the surface of the lens and you won't want it. So I'm going to cock the shutter, cock it here by swinging that arm across, bring that into the cocked position. That allows me to drop my retard gear train into position. There's a pivot screw here. It's got a raised head on it. This tab at this end needs to be pulled back towards the outside of the case so that the arm will drop down behind a tab on the blade actuating ring. And our small round-headed screw drops in here. Now at this end, that's where the adjustments are made to the position of the retard gear train in order to adjust the speed the shutter runs at. So I'll just start with that midway through its travel. That's about there. Tighten that up. Check that that arm is free. Tighten the screw at this end. Now if I release the shutter, that should run at about 1 second. That was running a little bit quick. So that tells me I need to bring my speed train in towards the lens tube, towards the centre of the shutter, for greater engagement with the cam. So I'll cock it again. You have to cock it so that the arm will move freely here, which uncovers the screw we're going to use to adjust it. So I'm just going to slacken that screw off slightly. Swing my speed train in slightly. Tighten the screw again and see what we get. That sounded more believable. We'll leave it there for the moment. Now the delay action or self timer. The arm on this self timer, that slot has to fit over the post that was on this lever here. You remember that there was a post sticking up. This has to go over that post, so we've got to get that fed in there and over that post. And that's it there. Now I've got to get this mechanism settled down in here, so I'll just pull the lever back to run it down. When you pull that lever back to run the retard, get the delay action, don't go mad pulling it too far. It's only got a very light spring. If you stretch the spring out of shape, it won't work properly. And if it doesn't work properly, you can have a hell of a job getting things to go. That's it, that just settled into place. Sometimes you've got to muck around a bit to get this thing seated correctly. You can certainly tell when it's seated correctly. It's down below the surface of the shutter and it's sitting correctly placed there. That's good. Okay, what's next? Well, we've got our pinion. So next we've got our pinion, and this ring to go in place, and then there should be a shutter speed cam somewhere, and a retainer. Well, there's the front retainer. A shutter speed cam I've put down somewhere else. There it is. There's our shutter speed cam, which you can't see but I can. There we go. So these parts, I just want to give these a quick clean and then they can go into place. I'll just quickly clean these components. These components are all quite clean anyway. That's all that's required there. That can be installed on the shutter. I'll start with the little pinion gear here. I'll just put a tiny smear of molybdenum paste on the shaft. That drops in. The little tab on that pinion at the top here sits in between the spring and the lever at that point there. This piece just needs a wipe of molybdenum around the inside edge, around the outside edge, and that's all that's required. This fits in. The spring hooks over that post. Now the coupling here, I'll just get this correctly positioned because that's not at the moment. Right. You can see that the last tooth on this pinion gear fits into the last valley here on the ring. Now I just made sure that the little tab here on the delay action was pulled back past that ring. Now we have our speed cam. I'll run some molybdenum around the inside edge, around the outside edge, taking particular care here. This is where the speed train, the pin on it has to follow that cam, so make sure that's covered. I'll put a bit on the inside surface at this point here. It just needs a wipe, just to make sure that it runs nice and free, and then this can sit in place. it sits on here. There's the B lever. Make sure that's not trapped underneath it. Here's our speed train back from it at that point. And we'll fit the retainer ring. That should just clip down into place. The shutter's all held together at that stage. It's not going to fly to pieces. I can cock this by bringing this arm back. So the shutter's now cocked. That cocked this lever over here for the flash sync mechanism. It also cocked the main spring. If I bring my speed cam round to this position, that's 1/8 of a second, or should be, and let's see what we get. Well look, that thing jammed. It didn't follow right through. So something is wrong. And I've got to find out what. Right, let's have that off. Take that. Oh, very interesting. Our problem was this thing. As soon as that was down in position, it obviously stopped the mechanism running. And I think that what I've probably done is put one of those shutter blades in the wrong position. So, let me have a look. I'll cock the shutter, leave it open on B, and I can see that that hole is obscured. So that's what I've done. I've made a mistake. Well, that's going to take me about 3 minutes to strip that back down. I'll show you where the problem lay. We'll fix it and I'll put it back together. Well, here's the shutter as I assembled it. Had my first blade here, my second blade, first blade here, second blade here, and where I've made my mistake, I'll just move that ring round so we can see it easier. Is I have my cutout on the blade number 2 against this hole in the mechanism plate here. That was the wrong one. It should have been over here. So the blades were just in the incorrect order. So now I've just got to lay them back out. I started laying my blades in the wrong position. My blades should have started here. And the 6th blade, or the cover blade, goes there. Right, now I'll just finish putting the shutter back together again and then I'll bring you back as we test it. Well, 5 minutes later and I've got the shutter reassembled. This time it's correct. We can cock the shutter. It's set to 1/8 of a second at the moment. We can set the delay action. Release the shutter. The delay action runs down. And there you see the shutter fire. So, that was a trap for young players. I was busy telling you how to carefully position those blades and I'd started in the wrong position. So, there we go. That part's done. We need to fit the shutter back into the front part of the mount now. And that section will be ready to go back on the camera once the camera body's been done. I'll just clean this mount to get any old grease and rubbish off it. Now this was also covered in marks, which I wasn't able to tell whether they were scratches or glue or what they were, and I suspected sticky tape marks, and it's coming off. So I think I was probably right, that those marks were from adhesive tape that somebody had used to try and hold the front of the camera together. Oh, it's pretty tenacious stuff. The adhesive's got down into that engraved lettering. I might have to use something a bit more enthusiastic as a solvent to see the back of that. We'll see how we get on. That seems fine. I'll wipe all those surfaces, wipe the inside surfaces. The shutter is remarkably clean really, and there's not much for me to have to move there. That looks fine. So to put this back together, well, the first thing I have to do is put a little bit of molybdenum paste on that little spring contact there. That's where the ball sits, the little ball bearing, the detent. And by putting a little bit of grease or a bit of molybdenum paste on there, that keeps that ball in place while we're working. Otherwise it would be off. There's no danger you could get the thing assembled. So I'll wipe the plate that sits in here now. Make sure that's as clean as I can reasonably get it. And that fits in. There's a little tang on here, a little fork, that has to fit over a pin. And it's right there, by that ball. That plate has to sit central. If we take our shutter, I want to run some molybdenum paste down these serrated edge here. Those are the detents for the shutter speeds. I'm just rubbing that on the edge of the body, is at the edge of the shutter body there as well, to make sure that's not too tight. And this has to lower into place without disturbing that ball. It only fits in one place. That felt like it clicked into position. There are 3 screws that hold this shutter to the lens mount. I'll just do them up lightly, and I'll tell you why in a second. There's the 3rd screw. Now I've got to turn this over and I'm looking. So what I'm looking for here is to make sure that this black metal shield thing is sitting central, that it's completely centered, that it's not trapped or sitting somewhere off to one side. And I can check by shifting the shutter speeds to see if I can feel the detent and see if I can feel that the detent is smooth in action, which it is. So that's all good. I can tighten my 3 screws. There we have the shutter complete and ready to go back in. I'll put our rangefinder coupling in at a later stage, I think. First I want to get this onto that front plate that we previously cleaned. So I'll get that and get the screws ready to do that.